Why do people become addicted? One popular view says that for most of human history, life was nasty, brutish, and short. A primitive reward system in our brain drove us to seek experiences that were necessary for the survival of our species. Drugs of addiction hijack and overwhelm that system. Drugs of abuse cause vulnerable individuals to experience a complete loss of control, making them prefer drugs over naturally rewarding activities. Another view says life used to be much simpler. People shared things equally. But the modern world causes stress, trauma, and alienation. People use drugs of abuse to temporarily escape from the suffering triggered by modern life. In the Christian worldview, we sinned, and this broke everything, which makes it possible for addiction to take hold in a person's life, in families, and in larger communities. A somewhat cheesy metaphor for this can be found in this slice of Swiss. The solid bits are areas of resistance to addiction. The holes, gaps where addiction can get in. There are thousands of layers like this. Individual layers like personality, temperament, morals, and genes. There are family layers, community layers, and beyond. There are layers that have to do with our culture's norms and values surrounding substance abuse. Layers that have to do with availability, policy, enforcement. Layers that have to do with our healthcare system. When all the layers are stacked up, it looks like over 85% of us have enough protection to prevent a substance use disorder. Many people reject the Christian worldview because they reject an angry God, one who heaps guilt and shame on people. But there are two sides of the coin in the Christian view of sin, and thus two sides of the coin when it comes to addiction. In the Christian worldview, addicts are not inhuman drug zombies. They are also not innocent victims of a cruel modern world. We are always human beings created in God's image, capable of greatness and responsible for our actions. But are you aware of God's compassion for our sinful condition? If you have ever felt your sin or have ever had an addiction, you might be encouraged to know God sees sinners and addicts as tired and needing rest, hungry and thirsty for the bread of life and living water. In God's eyes, you are carrying a heavy burden that He wants to lift. You are sin sick, and Christ, the great physician. You are captive and enslaved, and God, the great emancipator. In Jesus, God is not pointing a finger at you. Listen to how He started His earthly ministry. On the Sabbath day, He went into the synagogue as was His custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to Him. Unrolling it, He found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then He rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on Him. He began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing."